Hi guys and welcome to the channel. I'm Wegener and I'm happy that you're joining me here today because I have two really exciting lenses and cameras on my table. The Canon EOS R5 with the RF 100 to 500mm lens, the Sony Alpha 1 with the Sony 200 to 600mm lens. When I was making my videos about the RF 100 to 500mm lens, a lot of you guys asked, but what about the Sony 200 to 600mm lens? It offers an extra 100mm reach advantage on the long end and comes at a very attractive price point. So when I finally had the chance to take out the 200 to 600mm lens in the field, I was really interested to see how it would compare to the much smaller Canon 100 to 500mm lens. So does the Sony really have a huge reach advantage, or is the difference much smaller than we think in the field? Let's find out. So when you're reading about these lenses on the internet, they might sound quite similar, but looking at them side by side, they could almost be not more different, couldn't they? The Sony is the much bigger, much heavier internal zoom, weighing in at 2.26 kilos or around 5.2 pounds. The Canon is a small, flexible external zoom that weighs in at just 1.3 kilos or 2.6 pounds. So that's the first really big difference between the lenses. I thought it's kind of interesting that the 100 to 500 with an attached R5 is still shorter than just the bare 200 to 600mm lens. And this is largely caused by the different philosophies when it comes to the zoom. The Canon is an external zoom that zooms in and out. So if you want to shoot at the 500mm, the lens will be this size, but it packs away really nicely to this small size that basically fits in any bag. If we look at the Sony, it's an internal zoom, so nothing on this lens zooms in and out, and the throw of the lens is really nice. It's very, very easy to zoom from 200 to 600mm just with two fingers. So that is really, really awesome, but it obviously comes at a price, and that is weight and size. I mean, both of these lenses you can still handhold all day, so it's not really a problem there. But when it comes to flexibility and size and the ability to fit in like smaller backpacks, the Canon definitely has a huge size and weight advantage over the Sony. The Canon is wide open at 500mm at f7.1 and the Sony at f6.3. So the Sony has a ever so slight advantage when it comes to the f-stop, but in the field, I found that difference to be really negligible. When it comes to the design of the lenses, they're kind of similar, but what I prefer about the Sony is that you can actually replace the lens foot like what was done on this lens. On the Canon, you can't really do that because this whole lens collar thing is one big piece. And if you want to use it on a tripod, you will have to get one of these plates and attach it to the bottom here. At the same time, the advantage on the Canon is that if you know you're only hand holding the lens, you can just take this whole collar off and then just use the lens without it. So while there's a downside if you want to use the lens on a tripod, there's a definite upside if you want to handhold the lens because you can just remove the foot and have an even smaller, more compact and lighter lens. Both of these lenses obviously also come with a lens hood. The Canon one, you twist it on and then it actually stays into place and you have to press a button for the lens hood to come off again. And it also has that little nice hole at the front. If you're using a polarizer, for instance, you can just open that and then turn the polarizer with your finger. That's a little bit more difficult on the Sony. The other thing I noticed that a few times the Sony lens hood just fell off in the field because it doesn't have a button to actually unlock it. It just kind of screws on and off. It kind of screws into place, but it seems to come off fairly easily. So a few times I just had that fall off. Not really a big problem, but yeah, just something that was a little bit annoying in the field. Talking about filters, the good thing about the 100 to 500mm lens is that it actually has a 77mm front element. So most of you, if you're using filters, polarizers for instance, or like neutral density filters for filming, you will already have those filters available. The Sony has a 95mm front element, so it's actually quite difficult to find any sort of filters for it, and if you find them, they will be very expensive. So this is something that if you want to use filters, especially for filming, then the 77mm front element of the 100 to 500mm lens is definitely a great advantage. The one thing that Canon has is this RF control ring where you can assign different functions to it, for instance, your ISO, your shutter speed, your aperture. So that can be quite handy in the field, although personally I don't really use it. The Sony doesn't have that, but it has these 3 buttons that you can actually assign functions to. For instance, you could assign the 1.6 crop factor to one of these buttons, and whenever you're in the field, you press the button and it switches to the 1.6 crop factor. So that can be quite handy. The main problem I've found with that is that the position of the buttons is, well, let me say, not great. Because what happens, I like to hold the lens like this. I don't like to hold it by the lens foot, I hold it in my hand. But the problem now is that these buttons are very easily pressed, and whenever I hold the lens in my hand, I involuntarily press these buttons all the time. So in the end, I just had to turn off any functions on them, because whenever I held the lens, I pressed the button and then I was just messing with my settings all the time. So this is something that is very good, but the design of the buttons is actually done in a way that I just press them all the time, so I had to turn it off. So if they could have put the buttons maybe just on top of the lens rather than at the bottom of the lens, that would have really helped. So let's talk about the minimum focusing distance of the lenses. That's where the Canon has a huge advantage. It goes from 0.9 meters at 100mm to 1.2 meters, which is about 4 feet at the 500mm. The Sony has a minimum focusing distance of 2.4 meters or about 7.9 feet throughout the focal range. So I can basically be twice as close to the subject than I can be with the 200 to 600mm lens. And that can be a huge advantage in the field, especially because this 100 to 500 can function as like an emergency macro lens. So let's talk about the image stabilization, these 2 lenses, and the IBIS in the cameras. Because when we're hand holding lenses, this is actually quite important. And both of these combos allow me to hold reasonably low shutter speeds without getting too many blurry images. At the same time, as you know, when we're shooting birds, we don't really want to have too low shutter speeds, because then we just get motion blur from the birds moving. So within reason, I could easily handhold decent shutter speeds with both of these combos. Where I really saw a huge difference was when it came to handheld video. On the R5 and the 100 to 500mm lens, with the IS and the IBIS in the camera, I could take fantastic, really steady video, and combined with the eye tracking in the video mode of the R5, it's really easy to take beautiful handheld video of birds, because I can simply concentrate on holding the camera still, and then the IBIS and the image stabilization do their thing, giving me nice smooth frames, and the eye tracking tracks the bird throughout my viewfinder. So I've been really using that a lot and has given me fantastic video that you can see in a lot of my videos. When I tried to replicate that on the Sony, I just couldn't. There's just no way for me, at least, to have it as stable as the Canon combo. When I'm trying to handhold the Sony A1 with the 200 to 600mm lens, it just doesn't want to seem to stay in one place and be nice and stable. If I had to describe it, it's almost like someone is kind of pushing the front of my lens in a direction, and the whole time I have to kind of counteract that, resulting in not so smooth and more shaky footage. And the A1 also doesn't have eye tracking for birds in the video mode. I tried the active steady shot mode as well, but there it was even worse than just the normal optical steady shot, because with the active steady shot engaged, the image started to move really robotic. Without it, it was kind of shaky, but I think I could stabilize it in post. Whereas with the active steady shot engaged, the more focal length I had, the worse it got, and the image really started to move like that, rendering it unusable video essentially. So when it came to the stabilization, the 100 to 500 with the R5 has a distinct advantage, at least in the video mode. For stills, I found both to be more sufficient, but yes, with video, I could only really recommend the 100 to 500 with the R5 if you're planning on doing a lot of handheld video. Also because it does have the eye tracking in the video mode as well. Talking about autofocus, that's obviously something that's very important as well. And I talked about it in more detail in my video about the R5 and the A1. But generally speaking, both of these combos deliver fantastic and super fast and super accurate autofocusing. The Canon Animal Eye Autofocus is a little bit better at subject recognition, especially at greater distances. It just picks up the burst quicker and more reliably. However, once a target is acquired, both cameras track the bird very well, but I would give a slight edge to the Sony that really seems to jump onto the bird and then just stay glued to the bird throughout the whole series of images. Overall, both of these combos have delivered me fantastic action, fast action, and also just still portraits, and there's no real concerns there for me. I would be very happy with either of them in the field when it comes to the autofocusing. But now I've been talking so much about taking images in the field, but haven't shown you images. So let's change that and jump right into my image examples. So let's look at a series of images and start with the same rainbow lorikeet from my backyard. Low light, higher ISO, but if we zoom into these shots at 100%, we see really nice sharpness and really nice details in both of the images. If we look at the Sony shot on the right, I think it maintains some more detail in the really bright areas, a little bit better than the Canon shot, and also in the dark areas. There you see a tiny bit more detail, but all in all, I thought the files of both cameras in this example and both lenses were very nice and sharp with very nice details. So then we went out to one of my favorite places in Victoria to photograph the Cape Barren geese, and we managed to have a goose stand in front of us for probably like 15 minutes or so. So we were able to capture shots without the extenders from the same position and then shots with the extenders to really show you the difference between 500 and 600 millimeters, but also just how nice files both of these cameras can produce. So if we zoom into this file at 100% now, we can see that both of these images are really, really nice and sharp. The Canon on the left, the Sony on the right. The Sony is a little bit bigger because the camera has 50 megapixels, so a little bit more pixels than the R5, and also obviously 500 versus 600 millimeters. That's why the file on the right is a little bit larger, but I think overall the sharpness and details are very, very comparable in both images, and it would be hard for me to really pick a winner in this scenario. So let's look at the shot with the 1.4 extender on. Here you see the difference between 700 millimeters on the left and 840 millimeters on the right. In this case now I was actually moving forward a little bit, trying to match the goose in the frame. So the advantage between the 700 and the 840, I kind of negated it by moving a bit further forward. But if we zoom in to that to 100%, again, we see really, really nice sharpness and very good details still on both of these lenses. And it's interesting, if the further we go back, the more it seems like the Canon has a little bit smoother, nicer looking fine detail. But then when we go to the area around the eye, it feels like the Sony has a little bit more crispness overall. But all in all, looking at these two as well, I would say that both of these cameras, also with the 1.4 extender attached on their respective lenses, did a really fantastic job. And I have a few more examples for you here with the extender, because especially for the Sony lens, if you put a 1.4 extender on the 600mm lens, that gets you to 840 millimeters in this small size. And that's something that's really cool, especially if it delivers good quality. And when we look at these samples, it does. The first one is a singing honeyeater with the 100 to 500, 700 millimeters on the R5. And here we see beautiful details in the shot all around, just sitting on the bush with that lichen branch coming out of it, an image that I really liked. The next image is an image with the A1 200 to 600 and the 1.4 extender, and that was quite impressive because the sun was already fairly high up. And if we zoom into this shot, we can see that the A1 at 840 millimeters delivered really impressive sharpness and details at a fairly decent distance. So that was another great example how the extenders worked very well on both of these cameras. And if you're using the extenders, wide open is f10 on the 100 to 500 and f9 on the Sony lens. But there's one thing that you should know about the Canon that I'm really not a fan of, but it is what it is, I suppose. And that is, if you want to put an extender onto the 100 to 500, you have to zoom out to 300 millimeters, grab your extender, put it on, and then the lens doesn't zoom further back than 420 millimeters to 700 millimeters with the extender attached. And then it actually also loses its compact size. So with the 100 to 500, if you want to have it compact, you can't leave the extender attached to the lens. With the extender attached, it's actually almost the same size as the 200 to 600 now. So this can be quite annoying in the field. If you know that you're using the extender, you will still have to take it off to be able to then zoom back so the lens and camera fit nicely back into your backpack. So this is something that's quite annoying and not really a great solution, but that's what it is, I guess, to keep it this small size. And on the Sony, this is where it's very well done. You put the extender on and the lens stays the same size. And this Sony extender is actually so tiny that it almost adds no weight or length to your lens. So that's really awesome when it comes to the Sony lens, because it works really well with the extenders. If you ask me which combo would you pick to photograph a small distant bird with the extender and that you think would more reliably give you a good result, I would have to pick the A1 with the 200 600 millimeter lens and the 1.4 extender, because it did really, really well with that. It delivered me great sharpness. The 100 to 500 did well at 700 millimeters as well, but overall I felt like it was a little bit more iffy to get sharp shots at times. Another awesome series of RAWs that I want to show you is when behind my house a whole flock of cockatoos landed, and I had the opportunity to just go there and take some cool images with both of these cameras. And the first series of images are with the R5, and you can see it was able to very well track the fast action and the cool stuff that these crazy cockatoos were doing. And then here's a few files with the A1 where the cockatoos just did some crazy stuff, gave me some really cool poses. So once I edit these up, they will look really amazing. All in all, I think both of these delivered fantastic images also when it came to action photography, and neither of these cameras get distracted when there's a lot of busy backgrounds or anything in your background. Once they acquire focus, they track the birds really reliably against any sort of background. And then let's move on to some more images. Here's an image that I really liked, R5 100 to 500 in the very early morning light. Super nice, super crisp. And I just love the colors in the breeding plumage with the bright red on the eye and the beak, and then that nice and blue background. Next, I want to show you this shot of the little Corella that I really, really liked. A1 200 to 600 with the 1.4 extender. And I was just driving along and I saw this cockatoo sitting on top of a bin. So I quickly stopped the car, grabbed the Sony combo, snuck up to the bird. It was quite difficult to find a background, but then I spotted like this red colored house with a few bushes in front of it behind the cockatoo. So I positioned myself in a way that I could get that red house in my background. And then I actually got this very cool shot. And when we zoom into this, you just see what an amazing job the A1 did with the 840 millimeters. It's pretty amazing, isn't it? And another shot, A1 200 to 600 mid-air action. I've never seen the cockatoos actually do that, almost flying upside down like birds in prey. So that was a really cool scene that I was happy to capture with the A1 200 to 600, and it did a phenomenal job on staying on the birds. Very well done. So next I want to show you some awesome images from the Cape Barren geese with the babies. And this was one of those times where the R5 seemed to focus a bit better on the babies. The A1 struggled to find the eye on the babies and often would focus on the body or in the grass or somewhere else in the image. So when I was photographing the baby geese, I often gravitated towards the R5 100 to 500 combo. First of all, because it was tracking the birds better. Secondly, because it had the 100mm advantage at the short end, and I want to show you some examples there because the difference between 100mm and 200mm in the field can be quite dramatic. So first I want to show you what I'm talking about with the Sony camera. Here you have a nice series of images. The baby bird is right in the center of the frame, so you think it should pick up the eye, should pick up the bird, but when we zoom in you can see it completely missed focus and it's kind of on the grass in front of the bird and then like on the mum's neck. If we zoom into the next photo, same thing, next photo, same thing, next photo, same thing. And then here you can see it can actually get it, especially in better light, but this was disappointing. So here's now an image that I really like where you can see the little baby just walking in front of the parents with the siblings. If we zoom into that, you can see the R5 in this case was able to really nicely track this image, giving me a beautiful shot of this baby. And then here's one of my favorite images from the outings that I have with both of these cameras. That's R5 100 to 500mm with that really cute little baby goose just on these plants and then the mum just poking their head into the shot, keeping an eye on her baby. So one of my favorite images. This is the edited version. Here's the before version. As you can see, just with a few little tweaks, you can transform your good raw images into spectacular final images. And if you want to know how to do that, make sure to check out my masterclass in the description where I show you step by step how you can master image editing. And then the geese just started walking in front of us in this dramatic morning light where the sun was just coming out between the clouds. And a real big advantage here was that I could take this amazing scene at 100mm, get all 3 babies and both parents with the stunning scenery in the shot. Whereas I could kind of hear Dwight behind me swearing because when he tried to get that with the 200 to 600mm lens, this is kind of what happens. This is essentially the same scene, but just trying to get the shots with the geese from some sort of angle to fit them all in, but at the 200mm it was just impossible to get that same point of view and he wasn't able to get those images that I was getting. And I always talk about the flexibility, but this would be one example where having the 100mm was a real game changer for me, and also having the 100mm right at the turn of my hand. If I had to grab another camera with another lens, I might miss those shots. So here, having the ability to zoom quickly out to 100mm allowed me to get these amazing shots. And then what I also like is the flexibility of the 100 to 500mm lens that I just talked about, because you can get the shot on the left, and then from almost the same position, you can also get the headshot on the right-hand side. So that flexibility is really amazing to me. And then I've prepared another example here for you that was taken from the exact same spot with both cameras, and it dramatically shows the difference between 100 and 200mm. That's quite an astonishing difference, isn't it? And in the field, I personally felt like I would really struggle, considering that I do a lot of photos, videos, B-roll without the 100mm. They gave me a distinct advantage in this location. Because in this location, it wasn't all about getting tight shots of the birds or having small distant birds, but it was also to include the scenery. And I could include the scenery with this lens without using another lens, and that was kind of impossible with the 200 to 600. So that's just something to consider. I'm not really saying one's that much better than the other, but for different use cases, one or the other will definitely be the better tool for the job. And personally, I really value the ability and the flexibility that I get with the 100 to 500mm lens. For the price of the Sony lens, the image quality was really incredible, and it's a fantastic tool in the field if you want to get maximum reach. So let's talk about one thing that White and I discovered in the field when shooting with these lenses side by side. In the past, when I was shooting with a 500mm lens and a 600mm lens, the difference between the two is usually like one really large step, like about 1.2 meters or around 4 feet maybe. But when we were shooting side by side and trying to see how much closer I would have to be with the 100 to 500 to the subject compared to the 200 to 600, it seemed like we could shoot from almost the same spot. The difference between the two lenses was only maybe 50, 60 centimeters or like 2 feet. To explore this issue further and see if the 200 to 600 potentially has a lot of focus breathing, I set up a perch about 5 meters or 15 feet away from me in my backyard and then photographed the incoming lorikeets side by side with the 100 to 500 and the 200 to 600mm lens. So when we look at the resulting images, we can see that at this close distance, the difference between the 500 and the 600mm is actually not that large. So now I was quite curious to see how the 200 to 600 would actually compare to my 600mm prime lens. So I went ahead and got that lens, lined up the cameras in the back, and then shot with the 600mm at 600mm and the 200 to 600 at 600mm. There was a huge difference in the size of the bird in the frames. The 600mm prime lens had a significantly larger bird in the frame compared to the 200 to 600mm at 600mm. So this is quite a fascinating issue and actually affects all lenses. But how much lenses are affected by this issue depends on the build and the design of the lens. The reason that the focal length are different at shorter ranges is because the focal length of a lens is actually measured at infinity. And another contributing factor is the distance between the sensor and the optical center of the lens. So these two factors combined cause the issue that at infinity, the 600mm prime and the Sony 200 to 600 have both the same focal length, but the closer you're getting to the minimum focusing distance of the lens, the more effective focal length both lenses are losing. However, the design of the Sony 200 to 600mm is the most effective design when it comes to losing effective focal length. So prime lens like the 600mm lens loses the least amount of effective focal length. The 100 to 500 with the external zoom design is somewhere in the middle, and the most effective is the Sony 200 to 600 or any internal zoom design. They lose the most effective focal length the closer you're focusing to the minimum focusing distance of the lens. So this is quite an interesting situation in the field now, where both of these zooms lose significant focal length when compared to a 500mm prime lens or a 600mm prime lens. But because of the different designs of the two lenses, the 200 to 600 is actually also losing focal length or effective focal length compared to the 100 to 500mm lens. Because if I put the 100 to 500mm lens at 500mm and focus on a bird 5-6 meters away from me, I will have to zoom the Sony lens out to around 525mm to match the magnification of the 100 to 500mm lens. So this is where I felt like not having the 100mm on the wide end is almost more of a disadvantage than not having the 600mm on the long end. At the same time, you've obviously seen that I own a big 600mm prime lens. So because I have that prime lens for ultimate reach, the 100 to 500 gives me a lot of flexibility that I miss when I'm using the 200 to 600mm lens. If you're just after ultimate reach in a smaller package, then the 200 to 600 still has an advantage over the Canon lens, even though the actual advantage in the field seems to be less than what you think it would be on paper. So both of these lens and camera combinations deliver fantastic autofocus, great image quality, even with the 1.4 extenders attached, and all around great performance. So which one of these combos might be the right one for you? R500 to 500, A1 200 to 600. I think if you're looking for a lens that can give you ultimate reach, you can use with a 1.4 extender, or you can even use in the 1.5 crop mode on the Sony, giving you over 1000 millimeters of reach. The 200 to 600 still has a distinct advantage when you want maximum reach to photograph those small birds. But if you're looking for something that's much smaller, much lighter, has a lot more flexibility because you can shoot wider and you still get a lot of reach and have to maybe be a little bit closer to the birds at times compared to the 200 to 600, then the 100 to 500 offers you a very compelling package. You let me know in the comments, what do you value? Do you value ultimate flexibility, small size, or the ultimate reach, which obviously is quite important when it comes to nature photography? Another consideration is obviously price. Let's look at the prices in the US. The 100 to 500 is about $2,700 US, and R5 is about $3,800 US. So altogether, this combo at B&H today you can buy for around $6,500 US. With the Sony combo, that only gets you an A1. In saying that though, the price of the 200 to 600 on its own is unrivaled. For what it delivers, it's essentially a steal. Even the performance with the 1.4 extender is still outstanding, and I would actually love to own this lens because it's so good and it offers this fantastic reach at an incredible price point. So the real difficulty stems from Sony only having the A1 available with animal eye tracking, or I should say bird's eye tracking. And this is something that I would not want to miss anymore in any camera. The R5 and the R6 have it, and for Sony, only the A1 has it. So the only Sony camera I would personally consider in the Sony lineup at this stage would be the A1. So the A1 with the 200 to 600 millimeter lens brings us to almost $9,000 US. So there's significantly price increase for this combo compared to the Canon combo. However, I know in most other countries, this 100 to 500 is a lot more expensive than in the US, kind of shrinking that gap a little bit, but I think it's fair to say there's probably about a $2,000 price difference between the two combos. So if you take that into consideration, I think the R5 with the 100 to 500 offers you a lot of bang for your buck, great files, great flexibility, great size, but at the same time, the Sony combo offers you the ability to shoot distant birds or birds larger in your frame that the Canon combo can't match to the same degree. So which one would it be for you? Let me know in the comments. I really hope you enjoyed this little insight into these different lenses, my finding, my photos. Let me know in the comments what your thoughts are, which combo would you consider. Give me a thumbs up for this video. Thanks for watching. Make sure to subscribe to my channel. Check out my masterclass down there in the description, and I will see you in my next video very soon. Bye.